Hello, everyone. Welcome to my next video, my next astrology video. And there's some major happenings here in the month of March 2023. Some very significant moves by a couple of outer planets and another one coming up also in May of this year. This is leading to even greater topics with the movement of these outer planets, and we're going to be talking about one of them today, our friend Saturn moving into Pisces. So without further ado, I will share this with you, and just we've got lots of things that are really going to be important in all of our lives as we dive into this particular topic. Saturn in Pisces, 2023 to 2026. This is a special episode of Science, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. I'm Erik Roth, shamanic astrologer, and here to take you down this road of looking at Saturn, what Saturn is all about, how it shares with what Pisces is involved in as an archetypal expression in our lives, and some of the alignments that Saturn and Pisces will be involved in, particularly one with Jupiter. And I'll be sharing about that at the end of this episode. So what are some of the big things? Well, we're going to talk about what Saturn in astrology. We'll have a slide about the sign of Pisces, and of course, the big topic, Saturn in Pisces, and a little bit of history of Saturn and Pisces. So when it was in the sign of Pisces prior to the 2023 to 2026 period. And then at the end, we'll look at the next stage of the Saturn-Jupiter cycle. So Saturn in astrology, and particularly the type of astrology that I practice, shamanic astrology. So Saturn is a planet that is at the limits of what we can see visually, meaning like it's as far as the physical location, the solar system, we can't readily see the other planets that orbit outside of Saturn. Although there are times when, if you've got really, really sharp eye and you know exactly where to look at a certain time of Uranus's orbit, you may be able to point out a pinprick of light with where Uranus is. But for the most part, the planets all the way they go to Saturn, Saturn being sort of the limit. And in fact, throughout history, it's been looked at as representing the limits. And in shamanic astrology, here are some of the basic qualities, the major basic qualities of this planet: growth through limits and boundaries, tension and stress upon what needs to change, both in our own natal chart and in transit. It kind of gears us up to invest time, money, and energy in the long term. So it really puts us in a space of really kind of looking at our life beyond just what we're going to do the next day, but the next year and the 5 years from now. Also, it represents shedding our skins as we mature as people, particularly when it comes to Saturn transits in our lives. You may find in other types of astrology, they call them transits or cycles. And sometimes in a shamanic astrology, we call them initiations as well. So it takes us to task in responsibilities. So things that we're obliged to do that we have to own up and work on in our lives. Family, work, self-care. Now we can't get away with just lounging around all the time. Saturn, will be right there with us, taking us to task. So it also shows us the importance of linear time. I mentioned the long term and how vital it is. That linear time in the middle world are glued to the hip there. But that's sort of the domain of Saturn, if you will. Assist us in staying grounded, so we can, in whatever parts of our lives that we might be going through, things that are sort of taking us out of our body, so to speak. Saturn helps us keep focused and on the ground, and even if we don't have any very much in the way of earth signs in our chart, like Capricorn or Taurus or Virgo. If we've got some Saturn energy, that can help us stay kind of more earthbound, if you will, in this lifetime. It helps us get serious with what can be effective in life and our livelihood, but it also can show us where we have judgment and criticism over ourselves and over others. So it can be both a projection out there that particularly if we have a Saturn complex, or if there's a strong Saturn initiation taking place, we may have judgment over others and, sort of project that blame, and that they're the ones who are wrong, or that they're bad, or, we judge who they are. But it could be turned inward too, where we're judging ourselves and the fact that we may be ultra critical of our own actions, our own words, and not being good enough or perfect enough. And that typically shows up a lot when we're born with Saturn in aspect to our natal moon or sun, sometimes with Venus, Mars, and Mercury as well. And then also on a larger collective level, the laws and systems and structures of societies. And we've seen that quite a lot in this recent passage of Saturn in Aquarius, in sort of the curtailing of freedoms, the law and order, the sort of like what is fair and what is not fair, particularly with Aquarius and its desire for freedom and expansion in consciousness and equality. And so Saturn can feel like a manacle that's been placed upon that. But it doesn't always have to be that way. It's all in our human responses to that. It can show us where the pressure and the vulnerabilities are in our structure of society, and allow us to look at it carefully and diligently without reacting in such a strong and violent way, if you will. All right, so let's take a look at Pisces. And so we got to put together those pieces of what Saturn is and then what Pisces is before we bring them together. So Pisces is a sign in astrology that symbolizes the archetype of the healer, the empath, and the mystical dreamer. It's a strongly celestial-oriented sign that does not operate well in linear time or the middle world. It is a highly sensitive, empathic, archetypal expression. It is an expert at providing a non-egoic, safe space without judgment. It is a giver sign, meaning it operates from the perspective of giving to others. In the middle world, it is at its best when in service to spirit, whether it is in others, the community, temples, churches, and other volunteer opportunities. Pisces is also a mystical dreamer and can get lost in other realms outside our third dimensional reality. It can be prone to escapism through fantasy and anything that alters reality, including plant medicine and other kinds of drugs that take us beyond just our you might say, our Saturnian realm. Pisces also has a romanticism with all that is around it and susceptible to believing in illusions. So there is a sense of this sort of this dreamer part where it can be both very healthy, and then the sort of the toxic, where we're always in that dream world and wanting to escape and not looking at, even to the detriment of our own health, what's going on with our own bodies, with our families, with our job. It could lead us down a very toxic road if we're not paying attention to beyond just, I need to escape. Life is so overwhelming. And certainly Pisces is strongly sensitive enough that that reality of third dimensional reality can overwhelm it. But this is when it needs to show up and seek help, and learn what it means to maybe put, boundaries and I say personal shields up for ourselves, so that we can help filter out and also purge out any toxins we've taken on as well. It really is something that tends to be an introverted sign for this very reason, meaning that when it goes out into the world, and it's around a lot of people, it can take on a lot, and then we'll need balance in that. And as a personal testimony, I can certainly share about that in my own life. And there's plenty of stories that I've got, but I'll just share that I can confirm that that's what I do. I go on road trips, I go to fairs, but then I also come back and I spend time with myself, just kind of, introvertedness, um, sort of decompressing from all that energy that's been spilled around psychically and emotionally everywhere around us. So Pisces needs that to balance out being out there and being of service to the world. All right, so this combination of Saturn and Pisces, 2023 to 2026. Now, there's a period in this. March 7th, 2023 is when Saturn officially moves into Pisces, the sign of Pisces, not the constellation. So I'm going to show you everyone here a picture of the night sky, so that constellation of the water bearer that it moves into here. But there is a period in this 3-year zone where Saturn moves into Aries before retrograding back into Pisces. So between May 24th, 2025 and September 1st, 2025, Saturn is in the sign of Aries before retrograding back into Pisces. So this is something that it's not just a blanket. We can say 2023 to 2026. Sure, that's most of that period for sure. And it's the first time since 94 through 96 that Saturn has been in the sign of Pisces. So it's something to look forward to. And of course, there'll be future updates with Saturn's movement through the sky and through the signs. And that will be certainly feels like another episode to talk about Saturn and Aries and its back and forth with Pisces. So Saturn addresses middle world issues, including the structure and systems of our lives, relationships, goals, financial health, and the physical health, and in particular, our bones and stamina. Saturn also shows up in laws and rules of humanity. Saturn in Pisces is about these themes. Some of the major themes here: illusions in our lives and being able to see them in reality. What dreams can we bring into reality, and what would work on a practical level? There's also an emphasis on sustainable healing in the wholeness of our bodies and psyche. So some of these are healthy inquiries and something that can actually be highly beneficial to society, particularly on sustainable healing and the wholeness of our bodies and psyche. Our responsibilities around our own spiritual development, empathy, and being of service to others, again, could be hugely beneficial to society. Collective sacrifices for the greater whole, including collective suffering. So this is something that I'm going to talk a little bit about as one of the challenges of Saturn and Pisces. And then the other challenge there being blind faith in spiritual movements and religion coming down to earth. And that's another piece that I'm going to bring in over the next few slides here that I want to talk about, especially in past Saturn and Pisces incarnations. So 2 words that we want to look at here: sacrifice and service. Sacrifice and service can be both healthy and toxic, particularly with sacrifice. We've seen throughout history that there can be large sacrifices that are made, sometimes in things that have no bearing in reality and are that kind of live in what we might call the fantasy world, or in the land of illusion or even delusion. But then the other side of that is, the prominence of Pisces and its heart and its ability to believe and connect with the divine, and how powerful that could be, and the sacrifices that could be made through the heart and soul. That's where it can also be very healthy, especially in sacrificing for things that need nourishment, things that need to help in healing and service in the world, because ego is not in the language of Pisces at all. So these are 2 words that we can, kind of key in on with this transit of Saturn in Pisces. Now, where has Saturn been in Pisces? What time periods? Here's the last 4 time periods. Again, these dates include times also when Saturn was in a different sign, either when it retrograded back or ingressed into a new sign before retrograding back into the sign of Pisces, like this upcoming incarnation of Saturn in Pisces 2023 to 2026. So the last 4, May 93 through April 96, March 1964 through March 1967, February 1935 through January 1938, and April 1905 through March 1908. So those are the 4 last times. And again, this is, it's not the solid amount of time it spends in there. And it's about roughly every 29 to 30 years that it can move, completes the transit through all 12 signs and getting back, in this case, to Pisces. So you can see here, it's been close to 30 years since it first entered Pisces back in the 1990s. All right, here's some other points around this, and particularly of themes that from previous incarnations of Saturn and Pisces. This could be that I've found in looking at history and those time periods. Again, it's not all, some of this is due to other factors, not just specifically only Saturn and Pisces, but Saturn and Pisces had a contribution there. Like in the 1960s, there was a period where Saturn was in Pisces. Here is 1964 through 67. Saturn was in Pisces, while Pluto and Uranus were conjunct in Virgo. So that was a really powerful alignment of planets. And at one point, Chiron even joined Saturn in that process. So we saw, really powerful expression, and it was very revolutionary. But it also, new structures emerged in that, and a counterculture, even including a counterculture at the same time. So the response to the response. But there were, during this time, we saw the rise of the Vietnam War here in the U.S. as an example. There was also a pandemic that was also going on, I believe, in Asia during that time. So times of great suffering, sacrifices, and we saw the crackdowns of, protests and, against our own people, and in other places around the world in 1960. But also we come back to the 1930s. That's another, that was at the rise of really extreme nationalism and fascism. And we saw what that ended up as, with tens of millions of people dying, including a major Holocaust. But there were also other things like spiritual movements expressed through art, music, and emerging holistic structures. So with this collision of matter and spirit, because Pisces has a really strong resonance with spirit in that way, even though spirit can manifest in all these things, Pisces has a really a lot closer. It's like the veil is very, very thin between Pisces and the celestial realm. So there is they could be strong spiritual movements and holistic movements. And this is like the beginnings of during these times where we had greater awareness of, metaphysical or holistic healing practices, including in the 1990s, where a lot of books were coming out around that. New ways of experiencing what it means to be human, and, becoming more one with each other. That's very Piscean, and like ecstatic dances, and especially, this is another thing, holistic medicines, healing modalities, but then the mind-altering drugs and substances, either they're being clamped down, like in the 1960s, like for example, with LSD and marijuana, and then the emergence of it, of a greater level of this in a movement of actually bringing that more into the mainstream. In fact, we've already had some of this with this is not all Saturn and Pisces. We've had Neptune recently strongly in Pisces and also helping us realize some of the gifts of these other substances that were banned, particularly here in America, but in other parts of the world, where marijuana and other, and here where I live in Oregon, psilocybin and other drugs, these mind-altering drugs are legal in certain circumstances, and maybe not all of them, but quite a lot of them. And this is where I've had an explosion of new kinds of treatments for traumas and pain and depression and other kinds of mental ailments. These can be amazingly powerful under the right circumstances. And so this is this has been part Neptune and Pisces, but now Saturn and Pisces may bring this even more to the forefront of the mainstream, where there could be a reverse of this, of what we've been experiencing, but also at the same time where maybe perhaps here in the US, that Congress could pass certain laws that makes it, like marijuana, makes it more all legal. That's a possibility there too during this time. So beliefs turned into structures without viable futures. So there's the other thing is, okay, well, we've got all these beliefs and structures, and this is a time where I write it here as a separate one: crossroads for world religions and potential rise of new cults. Like those two really kind of go together in that way, meaning that there's a greater, broader sense of belief in what is beyond us, and that the actual housing or the structure and the limits that are in with, particularly with religion, if it's too constraining, if it's too rigid, this could be the time where it kind of breaks apart. And we've already had a sort of particularly with Christianity here in the U.S., there's been a reduction of people associating or calling themselves Christians, or at least church-going Christians, that they have their own version, their own personal version, their own connection to the greater divine and what that means. And that's I think that this is going to continue down that road, especially with Saturn and Pisces. Another thing with dreams and visions manifesting in reality, this is again a merging of spirit and matter with Saturn and Pisces. There's also going to, in a few years, Saturn and Jupiter will be getting together. Oh, sorry, not Saturn and Jupiter, but Saturn and Neptune will be getting together, and that's going to help this come alive more strongly with the dreams and the visions. But all of these very strongly emphasized. It's like, again, this is like a mix of, like, we could even say if it was Neptune and Capricorn, or Saturn and Pisces, it's very similar. But Saturn, again, is kind of the overriding expression here, meaning that it's through that Pisces is trying to express itself. So it's bringing spirit into matter, bringing those dreams and beliefs and visions and ways to actually incarnate here into some kind of a physical structure so that we can utilize, particularly with holistic medicines and healing modalities, and being of service out there in the world. And it doesn't always have to be the great suffering, like, for example, what happened in the 1930s and in parts of the 1960s as well. It can show up that way, but we have free will, and we can choose something different, because do we really want to repeat history? I mean, we've seen it here in the U.S., so kind of a reapplication of the kind of fascism that is showing up here. It's always kind of been simmering, if you will, in the U.S. over the decades, but in recent years, it's kind of risen to the surface more. All right, so here's the natal chart looking at Saturn's ingress into Pisces. And we can see right here, this is again March 7th at 5:35 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Mercury's only 8 degrees away, and the sun is almost 17 degrees. Neptune sits at 2447 Pisces right here. And Saturn and Neptune won't actually have an exact conjunction until 2026 at 0045 Aries. So they won't have a conjunction in the sign of Pisces, but in 2025, during the period when Saturn briefly ingresses into Aries, they are within 1 degree of each other from June 9th through August 23rd of 2025. So that's like what we call an almost conjunction. So even though there's only one exact one, there is one that they get really, really close for a couple of months. Now, Saturn, at the time of this recording, March 2nd, 2023, Saturn is about to become visible in the early morning sky. It's only a few days away from being visible. On this day, Saturn will technically be visible to those that have a very clear horizon in the east, and again, in the very early morning sky. So March 5th is when it technically becomes visible, and March 7th is when Saturn moves into Pisces. So it's been hidden. Saturn has been hidden in the glare of the sun since January 30th. So it's over the coming weeks, Saturn will become more and more visible. But if you're somebody that wants to really kind of honor Saturn's visibility, its rise, it's what we call heliacal rise in the early morning sky, then it could be good for like a morning meditation on March 5th and even on March 7th when it first moves into Pisces. These could be days to kind of connect in your own life, in your own way, to Saturn and its gifts and what it can help you in your own life, in your own life journey here. Particularly if you have something, any personal points or planets in the early degrees of Pisces, the first 7 degrees, Saturn will definitely be conjuncting your Pisces. And then, of course, the early degrees of Sagittarius, Gemini, and Virgo will also be impacted greatly during this transit that will go on through at the end of this year, 2023. So Saturn in the sky, here it is rising. I've got it low on the horizon to show it's rising here on March 7th, 2023. But we can see where it is. Like this is the water bear constellation, the one that astronomers still call Aquarius, but is just a human figure bearing a urn or some other vessel and pouring down cosmic waters into the earth. And this is kind of the ladle that is holding up the urn along with the human figure's arm. And this goatfish is like this wedge shaped, although the lines don't show the full wedge. Sometimes I fill in the blanks and fill in the lines here, but it's like this wedge shape of the goatfish. Saturn's been spending a lot of time in there, particularly in 2022, over this area, the tail of the goatfish. But now it's reaching into the early degrees of Pisces, and you can see here is where the line is. This is where Aquarius ends and where Pisces begins. So the water bear has part of its constellation in Aquarius, and then most of it is in the sign of Pisces. And this is precessing. So this line is moving from left to right, and eventually over the centuries will get into the tail of the goatfish. So again, this is where that is, and this is the last sign of the zodiac before we get to the March equinox point. Again, Saturn will be really, really dim, but again, if you have a really clear horizon and very little light pollution, then like in the deserts would be one of the ideal places, or sometimes even in other places like flat lands or low mountains, you could see Saturn rising above the horizon there before the sun. Okay, so there's another thing to consider is that we're also in the next stage of this Saturn-Jupiter cycle that began in 2020. Saturn and Jupiter spent a lot of time together with, of course, with Pluto and Aries squaring Aries, but conjunct with Pluto in 2020. They came to a conjunction on December 21st of 2020 at 0 degrees 29 Aquarius. So just inside, it was the only conjunction that we were able to experience until we get to 2040 when it conjuncts in the sign of Libra. But every 20 years, they have this regular dance that they do together. And so we're approaching a time beginning in 2024 where we're in the next stage of the Saturn Jupiter cycle, where there is the square. It's like the end of the first stage and the beginning of the next stage. And two of these three squares happen in 2024, and the other one happens in 2025. And that third one is when Saturn is in Aries, and Jupiter had already just barely moved into Cancer at that point as well, at 1 degree 18 minutes. So this is like marking that time. It's like a crossroads of what happened in 2020 and how far we've come. What is this next road that we're going to be traveling down? Because it doesn't complete until we get to 2040 with this Saturn Jupiter, just as the 2020 period completed what happened in 2000 when they were conjunct before. So this 2024, 2025 is that transitionary period. And I've got the different stages here to look at. So phase one of this ends in 2025 when it completes that Saturn Jupiter conjunction in 2020 to the Saturn Jupiter square, with the last one taking place in 2025 as Saturn moves from Capricorn to Pisces. So I include that not just the actual conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, but the lead up to that, because they were not only in the same sign together, but they got pretty close together in 2020, but prior to the actual conjunction. So it was at that point where Jupiter retrograded. I think they got within 5, maybe 6 degrees, and then Jupiter retrograded off, and then Saturn also retrograded. So they weren't able to actually meet prior to that. But certainly the amount of things that happened during 2020, tells me that whole year was really the beginning of this particular next wave of Saturn and Jupiter. The next phase after that is from 2025 to 2031, as Saturn moves from Pisces to Aries to Taurus. And it ends in 2031 because Saturn and Jupiter are in opposition to each other then. Phase 3 is from the opposition point of Saturn and Jupiter to the last square, the 3/4 mark of Saturn and Jupiter, as Saturn moves from Taurus all the way through the signs of Gemini and Cancer and into the sign of Leo towards the end. So 2031 to 2036. And then the last phase goes all the way until the next conjunction from Leo to Virgo and to Libra on 2036 to 2040. And then the next big 20-year period starts. There's even larger Saturn Jupiter periods that can last many centuries and that deal with the elements. And that's an entire topic all on its own. And maybe I'll do a video about that because there's some really great research on this that I can bring forth, not necessarily just mine, but others that I've read about, and I can identify those and share about that as well. But this is part of the overall turning of the ages, and this is one of the shorter cycles, this 20-year period, compared to these other longer cycles, which are many centuries or in certain cases, many tens of thousands of millennia, like the 26,000-year precession of the equinox. We're in that period now of great transition, and it's really, really messy. So this is one of the factors to consider as we move into the next age. But this is all I've got for you here. I want to thank you for watching this, and like and subscribe if you do, and share it with others as well. I practice astrology full time. I do classes, events, and astrology readings, and sometimes I travel on the road on the west coast of the U.S., potentially other places as well. Later this year, I'll be going to Colorado. So there is potential for other places for me to be there and do readings and classes. You can email me at inspiralnexus@gmail.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter at inspiralnexus.com. And I work also with Caitlin Castell at mystaralchemy.com, where we teach about the ceremony and magic and astrology of the stars. So feel free to check that out. And a lot of this information initially comes from the original teachings from Daniel Giammario and the Turning of the Ages Mystery School, formerly known as the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School and the Shamanic Astrology Paradigm. So thank you all for being a part of this, and I look forward to the next time. And take care of yourself, everyone. And all right, that's it for now. Be well.